Hey Punk Outlaw, it's Buddha Gem, and appreciated the video response, good as always. I'd hoped I'd made this more clear, but apparently it didn't. But I was in no way arguing that Jesus didn't exist or trying to make a case that he didn't exist. Neither was De Silva, and that's why I pointed out that last line from the paragraph where he says, this is not to say that Jesus didn't exist, simply that there is no independent evidence that he did. And I think that it's not to prove or disprove anything, but it's to put that out there. I know in my own experience, people are often surprised that there isn't, a ton of evidence that, Jesus existed. A lot of people I encounter are under the impression that there is evidence, and they're, often surprised by this fact. It doesn't prove anything one way or the other, but it gives us a more balanced idea of what we're talking about. And yes, we can have the similar arguments about the Buddha, but the Buddha isn't nearly as important a historical figure to Buddhism as Jesus is to Christianity. Because they'll tell you, if Jesus didn't exist, Christians will admit it right off the bat. If Jesus never existed, never died on the cross, never rose from the dead, it's all just a big lie. Now, if Siddhartha Gautama never existed, that really doesn't change anything, because we have a lineage of people for 2,500 years who've been practicing this. Maybe they made the guy up at the beginning. That's possible. And then there's some ethical questions involved. Maybe it's we can go a lot of different ways with that. But for most Buddhists, they're learning Buddhism, from the Sangha, from the community of monks and nuns, from the teachings that were handed down first orally and now through the Pali Canon, for Theravadan Buddhists at least. So the historicity of Buddha is just not really as important. And again, it doesn't prove anything to say, look, there's no independent evidence that he existed. Maybe, the James Ossuary, I'm still, the jury's out on that still, as far as I'm concerned. I don't think it's being taken that seriously among biblical scholars, but I could be wrong. But I'm open to it, My thing is, Jesus more than likely existed. I don't really have a lot of doubt in that regard. So this gets us to the second part of your question. Is it a productive or good way to argue? The first thing I'd like to say is De Silva's book, I believe, was published first in Sri Lanka, and it was aimed primarily, it was a book for Buddhists in Southeast Asia primarily, who were fighting against colonial oppression. And one of the forms of that oppression is cultural oppression, which is, these Christians come in and they browbeat, and of course they have access to all the good jobs, so of course you're tempted to enter their church and become friends with them, and there's this whole thing that goes on through colonial oppression. And one of those things is this conversion to Christianity, where that thing happens, the white man's burden and all that. And so it wasn't a book written to Western Buddhists, and Western Buddhists are probably some of the most adept people at arguing against Christians. We have plenty of different ways to explain to them why we're not Christian. Most of us come from Christian backgrounds in the West. But so this was primarily aimed at people who had no idea what Christianity was about, who had no familiarity with the Bible or Jesus or any of that. And so it was to give them some tools to combat the things that these fundamentalist Christians were telling them. And it was also, the second aim was to give those Buddhists a deeper appreciation of their faith. And then, there was a third aim. Well, anyways, I talked about it in my video. But so it's important to understand that. And so my video, I wasn't trying to argue against fundamentalist Christianity. I don't think the Bezel guy is a fundamentalist Christian. I could be wrong, but maybe he is, maybe he's not. But what he was saying was false. When he was trying to pretend that Tacitus and Pliny the Younger and Suetonius had, written these, independent verifications that Jesus existed, it's simply not true. And whether or not that's an argument against fundamentalist Christianity or whatever kind of Christianity, whoever's making that argument, it's just false. It would be false if a Buddhist was trying to say that certain historians had written about the Buddha when they hadn't. It would be just as false. So, hopefully that's a little more clear. Yeah, and as far as arguing with fundamentalists in this country, my own method that I've developed in dealing with lots of these people is I don't stray from the Bible. I don't bring up science. I don't bring up anything extra biblical, because anytime I've found you bring up somebody, it doesn't matter who they are. They could be the most world-renowned expert in that subject, and they'll say, that's just human knowledge, blah, blah, So if I stick with the Bible and I say, look, the Bible says this, and over here it says this, I find that I have much more progress. One, they're excited because they're like, wow, this guy actually knows about the Bible, and they're a little more intent on hearing me out. So that's my own technique, but I don't do that here on my YouTube channel, and that wasn't really the point of my video. It was really to say, look, you're not being honest. I'm not saying Jesus doesn't exist, but there's no need to pretend that there is evidence where there isn't, right? I mean, even though we have such little evidence, most of us aren't really in doubt that the guy existed, right? I mean, this movement did spring out of something. Maybe it was completely BS, but my gut tells me there was somebody somewhere, maybe it was the righteous teacher depicted in the Dead Sea Scrolls. There's a lot of questions, but there was somebody somewhere, right? Even Superman, completely fictional character. There was somebody behind that. There are figures in the past, in history, that are like the archetypes for Superman. So even Superman is based on somebody like a Gilgamesh, right? So I think I babbled on long enough. I didn't want this to go on this long. So hopefully I made that more clear, brother. Appreciate being the devil's advocate, and hopefully I made myself a little more clear. All right? Peace.